Brothers and sisters in Islam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين حمدا كثيرا طيبا مباركا فيه وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيبنا محمد وعلى آله الطاهرين ورضوان الله تعالى على صحابته الراشدين والتابعين لهم بخير إحسان إلى يوم الدين وأما بعد. Welcome back to another session of our classes on the history of racism and resistance in America. And before we get to today's instructor on this session on the history of the struggle of the indigenous people here and what we know now as these United States of America, I just want to let the audience know, and we will put out an email as well on social media, that for next week, we will be starting class at 7:30 so that we are not conflicting with the Salah time here in southeastern Michigan. And what we will do is that we will move the time to 7:30, and then once we have daylight saving time and time falls back, then we will go back to 7 p.m. with the permission of Allah Azza wa Jal. So today, I know that Maghrib prayer comes in at around like 7:18. So the class will be over during the time of Maghrib. So you would still have a half an hour to make Maghrib prayer, or for those of you before Isha prayer comes in at like 8:30, 8:32. But for those of you who would like to just step away for a couple of minutes to make your prayer, resume back, that's fine too. Again, these classes are recorded. So without any further ado, I'd like to call on Sister LaTanya Barlow. She is an Indigenous American activist, also a Muslim. She grew up on a Navajo land. I don't like the term reservation myself personally because of the connotation, but maybe she can clarify that language and what's more proper for us to use. But she is, again, a Muslim American activist, also an Indigenous American, or some would call Native American. And she will be talking today to us about a number of issues that relate to the subject. So let me bring on Sister LaTanya. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you very much for coming on, and the show is yours, and I will come back on when it is time for the Q&A session from our audience. So, Bismillah.
Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I am Sister LaTanya, and I am from the Diné Reservation, which is, reservation is actually a prison camp. But alhamdulillah, we are one of the tribes that have been able to go back to our ancestral lands after the long walk. But we can kind of touch up on these things as we go along. I would like to first introduce myself in my native language so that I can honor our way of introducing, which is actually a requirement, is kind of mandated. As a Diné woman, as a Diné person, we introduce ourselves to our relatives. So greetings of goodness. She'e LaTanya Yanshia, that's my government name. My mother named me LaTanya, actually. Chosnez is what was the name given to me by my grandmother. And that means the woman that is like tall, the one that grows. Like it means to grow, to be, to have a height. And that has its own connotations. And ashihinishla, tchachini bashishchin, look at the aidashiche, chisha aidashanele. So this is their clan system. So we and a lot of tribes throughout the northern tribes of Western Hemisphere, including the so-called United States and Canada, have a way of introducing ourselves. And if you look at the maps of past before the Europeans arrived, there were tribes who lived in very close proximity with each other. So there was a heavy emphasis on kinship, on relationships, and so this is how we introduced ourselves as Navajos, and it's a very matriarchal society. So I hold my mother's clan, and if I have kids, inshallah, the child will have my clan, which was my mother's clan, and my mother holds my grandmother's clan, so it goes back. And then my father carries his mother's clan. So we honor our mothers this way, and so we also understand, like, when it comes to the environment, we have a connection and a responsibility as a people, and not just being indigenous. So indigenous, and so these are all labels, and we can kind of touch up on that too, inshallah. I just want to so let me translate. Ashihin Nishle, I'm of a Salt People clan. I am born for, my father is of the Red running into the water people. Red running into the water people. And my grandfather's clan is the Reed people clan. And my father's father is of the Chiricahua Apache people clan, which were overtaken, and they were with the band with Geronimo when the soldiers came, and before he went off to be the prisoner of war camps. And so the Chiricahua Apache people have also been very resistant to the newcomers. So without further ado, please forgive me for taking a long introduction. But just so you know, the Navajo Reservation, the Diné land, is located in southwestern United States. It covers Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, and Utah, and is one of the largest tribes in the United States that have their own self-governance, their own nation, and we have our own president, vice president. We have elections, and I just signed up with my chapter a couple of days ago, the Nashanto chapter, to be able to vote and get these. And if I wanted to buy my own land back, I'll be able to have that affiliation. So, and this kind of ties into a lot more of how treaties and borders and labels all came to be. So, alhamdulillah. So firstly, let's go into some historical occasions in which the indigenous people were being displaced. And when I say indigenous people, I think of also the Australian natives from Australia, so-called Australia. I think of like south of the border, all the way down Chile, and all over the world, in Newfoundland, the Arctic, all the way up that way. We have all over the world. So when we're talking about the northern hemisphere, so being displaced from our lands and being forcibly relocated over the span of 500 years, over 500 years, we have to, in order to understand the extent of what's happened and what's happening now, we need to take a look at what was happening before the Europeans arrived. We have to understand things that were familiar, things that make sense, things that were simple, things in the natural law of things. And we're talking about nobody was homeless before 1491. We had communal homes over in Georgia and the southern states. The tribes there, which is, you can still see to this day, they have earth mounds. And these are like maybe 4 football fields long. And you had families, up to maybe 50 families in one building structure. So we had communal homes, and we adhered to natural laws, and we gave thanks. A lot of it was in relation to the connection to the earth. So we had to respect the water, give thanks, respect each other, give thanks. So it's all based on respect, and we're all given, and then the understanding of the tribes from one another is like, this is from the sea to the mountaintops, this is your responsibility. And then from that mountaintop over to those valleys, and that's your responsibility. And so these were agreements. And so a lot of, and if you look at the Constitution, the Iroquois Nation, the Iroquois Confederacy up over in Eastern United States, they had a lot of input when so-called America first decided that they wanted their independence from Britain to, they needed something to institute into law. So the Iroquois Confederacy, with their already laws that they've been living for generations before, was now taken and made into the Constitution of the United States, which is rarely credited to the native peoples at the time. And the Iroquois were overwhelmed extraordinarily by these Europeans that just arrived. So it's in taking care of them, fostering them back to health after their long journey over the sea. You can imagine how exhausted and what type of healthcare, what type of diseases they had that the indigenous people had to endure in order to help them, not knowing the greater implications of what was to come next. So, that being said, we're talking about diseases were not as prevalent. Diseases like gonorrhea, like syphilis, smallpox, cholera, just to name a few. And influenza, of course. And a new strain of influenza, actually, after time, was discovered here in the United States after the Europeans arrived with their influenza mixing here. Time went by, and a new strain of influenza. So, wallahu alam. So it was quite extraordinary in that time. So 1500s. In the 1500s, we've got, let's see here. Give me just a second. Let me double check my notes. So around let me kind of step back. Before the 1500s, you have which European nations arrived here, and who was who and who did what. We had Russian presence in the 1400s. We had Spaniards, there were Portuguese, Britain, and French. So France. So all of these European countries had some unfortunate. They had some negative impact in the beginning of their conquest of the West. So let's say in 1493, for example, how does Spain, all the way across the world, make a decision for a people, for my ancestors, all the way over here without having ever been here? So it's a lot of these reports being taken back to the royal leaders, or whoever they are. In this case, this is a pope. So in 1493, this pope asserts the rights to colonize, convert, and enslave. And that pope is Alexander V. So he issues a papal bull, or a decree. And this decree is called the I might be saying it wrong, CAIR-MI, in which he authorizes Spain and Portugal to colonize the Americas and its native peoples as subjects. So this decree asserts the rights of Spain and Portugal to convert, colonize, and enslave, which also justified the enslavement of the Africans at that time. So from 1493 to the 1550 to the mid 1500s, Native people began dying from these European diseases because they had the indigenous peoples had no immunity to the white men's to any of this. So we kind of like have to step back and look at here. Historical events. So when we talk about smallpox, when we talk about disease, when we talk about COVID-19 in modern day, this is all biological warfare. So biological warfare, chemical warfare, which is alcohol, methamphetamines, drugs, what have you, and industrial warfare. So that's where the Trail of Tears comes in, the Long Walk, the displacement of the natives, into these prison camps. And if you didn't know, the Pine Ridge Reservation up in South Dakota is known as Prisoner Camp Number 44. And so these are places that that the indigenous peoples were placed in order to keep us subjugated. So now we are repressed. And and so there's a repression, there's a violence, there's a brutality that we're already familiar with. So I just want to I wanted to mention that in speaking to um, the early 1400s, and then the presence of the people, and a lot of that was in that time was just meeting these new people, helping them, and then being annihilated by them. And a lot of it was through diseases. And we could talk about, I don't know how many tribes on the East that used to flourish, where take maybe a little village of maybe 25,000 is erased to almost nothing, up to like 5,000 people, maybe, if that. And then as time goes by, there's more sweeps of certain settlers. There's the government. There's the Spaniards. So we're having from all directions. So we're kind of being pushed from one way to we're like a plant just swaying in the storm of it all, going this way and moving this way. And so so these these is part of our roots of who we are today as a people. And alhamdulillah, Allah gave us to understand that what happened in the beginning was not good, but in a way, Creator is the one who manifests and makes all things happen, and He guides us through. And that and as a people, we don't lose that faith, and we believe that Creator is providing us a better way. And each day we go is a stronger day. And it's like it's always and you might have heard, and maybe um it's a famous quote. I'm not sure by who, I don't remember, but it's a good day to die. I think it was Crazy Horse. Today is a good day to die. And that is in a way, that's a bold statement, because that's a need, or not a need, but a desire to meet the Creator. And who wants to meet the Creator are people who have um, a sense of honor, and a sense of integrity, and to see so much, and to have endured so much, and to still have that faith beyond all these foreigners. I mean, we're talking about Russians, we're talking about Spaniards, we're talking about Portuguese, we're talking about the British, we're talking about the French, we're talking about all different types of people speaking different languages, and coming to for one goal in mind. So they so yeah, it's just it's a lot. And so once we understand how 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 much, because when we talk about the history before America is America, we only think of the British, the French, the Spaniards, but no one knows the what the Russian have did, and what the Portuguese role. But as we move along, the Russians continue to have a presence up over in the Arctic, but the Portuguese kind of start off the 1500s, and they kind of they begin kidnapping northeastern native peoples, and they abduct two shiploads of the Iroquois, the Iroquois Confederacy, which was introduced. So they're taking these intelligent peoples and turning them into slaves, taking them away from their homeland. And they and only Allah knows where they went and what happened to them. So that those people were from so-called Newfoundland, New England, and so they're sold into slavery with other explorers and people coming from all over the world, who are not subject to law or any order or any type of accountability or consequence for all for kidnapping and selling Native people into slavery. So it's very similar to how our relatives in Africa have probably experienced this onslaught of European colonization. So it's a similar journey that we share, and it's a very um, it's very sad, but at the same time it's a beautiful it's like a beautiful struggle, because it only makes our faith more. It makes our faith better. It makes us want to do better. It makes us want to um increase in truthfulness and in honesty and in prayer. And so these are values that we hold dearly. So back to the timeline. I mean, we have viruses that move along inland with French traders, and the Russians also enslaved the Aleut tribes to get to for fur. So fur was very popular amongst the French and the Russians. So there was exchanges of goods along the Atlantic, and it was the natives at the time were by that time, early 1500s, are very now they're very cautious because these people are bringing diseases. So and they have no immunity, so there's a lot more of caution of avoiding and being careful in the trade. So um, that that's happening, but it's too much of a too much. It's too deadly, I would say, um, and not having the science or the medicine to be able to fight off the diseases in the 1500s. Um, that's pretty much what the early 1500s looked like. And then in Taino culture over in the Bahamas, which is now what was then called Hispaniola, their culture by that time, by 1535, is actually completely gone. So they have been exposed to the Spaniards' conquest and torture, and their popes and their religion. So it was not pretty for the Taino people. And so the Zuni over back in the Southwest, the Zuni continued to resist the conquistadors, and the around that time, the around maybe 1540, 1580, um, uh, mid 1500s, let's say, the Spaniards introduced horses and sheep and cattle to the people along the what they call the horse culture societies. So we're talking about the Navajo, the Apache, the Comanche, the Great Sioux Nations. They all are introduced, and they take the livestock in as part of our culture. So the Navajo people, like my culture, we really took in the sheep. Like we became, and it's very in the last century, we're all shepherds. And when I was born, my belly button, it when a child is born, they have this little piece that's still stuck to them on their belly button when the umbilical cord is cut from the mother. So this little piece is cut, and it stays. There's a portion still stuck to the baby, and that is eventually it eventually dries up and it falls off. And once it falls off, that little piece is in the Navajo culture. It's placed somewhere, a place of responsibility, and it's put back into the earth. And so mine was put at the sheep corral. So so I was when I was like 3 years old, when I could just start walking, maybe two, I was already out there herding sheep with my grandmother, and we're talking about like sheep and goats of maybe like 150. And then I have cousins and aunties who had theirs put in like horse corrals. So we honored the sheep, and we honored the so everything that happened, this was the blessing in the storm in a way, because we have now a horse culture. So we take care of We love the horses, we love the sheep, and the sheep it became like food and transport for us. Alhamdulillah. So mid that's the 1500s. The Spaniards take over the um, uh, they 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 take over the pueblo areas, the regions over there, as well in the southwestern region of the United States. So the Spaniards continued to push forward all the way up into 1600s, 1680. They continue spreading their disease, and the Spaniards actually had a much they did a lot more work than all these other European countries. If you want to astaghfirullah, if you want to say that, but they did come into they came in from Mexico, the south of the so-called border. They came in and they went up to like Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, all these places, and then they also went from the Bahamas, into Florida and all the way up this way. So they kind of like had a grasp from the bottom, and then the it looks like Britain, as we move along, you'll see that Britain kind of, it looked like they waited for all of these other European countries to do all the dirty work. And they kind of, the British came in to kind of finish the job, so to speak. And that's in the 17, 18, 1900s. You have a lot more of uh, the English literature and English, um, like just the way of thought. And it gets pretty interesting how they try to justify their lies. And so these are before treaties have been written. So we're talking about 1400s, 1500s. Now we jump into the 1600s. In the 1600s, predominantly are the Spaniards and the English, and that's where we have the story of Pocahontas and the Powhatan chief over in Virginia. And they everybody that story. There's various versions of them, of what actually happened, and I'm not really going to touch up on that because that's not our point of discussion right now. We're just kind of like running through timelines, and so uh, uh, another treaty is signed over in that area with the Powhatan chief. So he passes away, and his brother is put in power, and Powhatan's chief, which is Pocahontas's uncle, is is he wages war against these colonists, and they eventually lose, and the English take over that region. Um, so that was an unfortunate turn of events for the tribe. And then in 1638, there's a reservation, which is probably, there's a reservation in other records that was first created, and that is in 19. Here we go. Give me just a moment. 19. Oh, 1786. 1786, the first Native American reservation was established. But if you want to go back and dig a little bit deeper, you'll find that in 1638, um, the Puritans forced the Quinnipiac tribe onto the first prison camp. So that's now known as New Haven, Connecticut. They they push the people from their homelands, and then they forbid them to leave the reservation, and then they restrict their cultural practices. So they're not allowed to leave, and they're not allowed to pray. And these Puritans start building. Sound familiar? In 1644, England declares war on the chief. So 1646, there's a new treaty, and after a few years, England establishes its crown in Virginia. So that's 1644. So from 1622 to 1644, there's that power struggle between the Powhatan chief and in English. And so this is happening on the East Coast, and then we can kind of like jump back over to the Southwest, where the Pueblos are revolting in New Mexico against the Spanish conquistadors. And the Pueblos revolt. They rise up and they successfully drive out the Spanish. So for 140 years, the Pueblos fought and endured the Spanish oppression, and Spain doesn't re-enter the territory until 1692. So from 1680 to 1692, 12 years, there's no Spanish presence in the Pueblo region. But as you know, it's a familiar process how the European, or this idea of supremacy it becomes manifest. So they build a statue of this Pope, who is the one that required the natives. It's called what is it called? It's a document. It's called it's called the requirement. So they have the natives, according to the Pope, issued a declaration that was the natives were required to say. And basically what they were saying is that I submit to, the Pope, I submit to the crown or whatever, and everything that's mine is basically yours. And so that's in a nutshell, that's what that's what the Pope did. And this a statue of this Pope is actually in the statutory hall at the U.S. Capitol. It's interesting how this becomes a thing as we travel along this little timeline of ugly American history that we need to talk about, so that maybe we can understand that not everything, so we can know that what we're being told is not in reality what it is. Anyhow, between 1600 and 1700, 75% of the peoples in Virginia die, including members of the once powerful tribe, including, and so these are the tribes that were reduced drastically, and probably even not named tribes that we don't even know the names of to this day. A few of them are Mattaponi, Pamunkey, and Chickahominy. So the English settlers just kind of sweep the Atlantic coast from Florida to Maine, and they leave nothing. They leave nothing untouched as far as biological warfare goes. And then we jump into the 1700s. So we have the presence of Russian, Spaniards, and English. They enslaved the Aleut people up north, and there's a 7 years war. So it's called the French and Indian War, but it's actually between England and France. So that you'll see in your history books is they'll call it the French and Indian War, and you will think that, oh, the French and the Indians were fighting, but no, in actuality it was England and France fighting for Indian land, so to speak. So that's happening around mid-1700s. Russian fur trade expands to the islands. The people resist the Russian occupation. And what's interesting is this kind of really stands out to me. I know I'm kind of covering a lot, and I hope that I'm not moving too fast, but I've got quite a bit of information to go over. This one right here, it really kind of opened my eyes a little bit more. In 1763, the Treaty of Paris that ends the war. So Britain claims the native land. So what that means is that England and France end the 7 Years' War from 1756 to 1763. The treaty is then they meet. So in the Treaty of Paris, in Paris, Paris, also called the Peace of Paris or the Treaty of 1763, France cedes its claims to most of North America east of the Mississippi to Britain. Now, during this time, there were already treaties or agreements with these newcomers, with the native tribes that have already established this, what France is ceding. So France is apparently ceding some claims, like some land, native land, east of the Mississippi. So that's not all French land. A lot of that is already written or agreed upon land that belongs to the native people, and that nobody can come in and do whatever they want. And so that's a known fact. But in this 1763 treaty, it mentions nothing of that. And so that's kind of like a turning point in basic. This is basic disregard for Native American rights, Indigenous rights, and it just kind of sets the tone for what's to come in the coming centuries. So in Ohio, we have the Ottawa chief Pontiac, who is fighting the British while this treaty is happening. So in 1763, 1764, Britain wages biological warfare of smallpox against the Shawnee and Delaware tribes. So initially, when the Europeans arrived, a lot of that biological warfare was it was prevalent. Like it was heavily amongst the people that came. So there was like that exposure is kind of like it's kind of like natural. Like it's going to happen. You're going to be exposed to that, and you got to do your part to kind of stay away, right? But eventually, the colonizers came and realized, oh, we can get them sick, So they started using these diseases to annihilate the tribe, so that they can lay their claim to this land. So this is all unceded land, all unceded territories, and these are all whatever treaties there are up to this point with any tribes. None of them have been kept so far. None of the treaties have been honored by the government, by any government, Spanish government, English government, French government, Russian government. The soldiers, and even just colonizers who maybe were not affiliated with any government. They just came on their own accord and decided that, oh, this is what we're going to do. It's ours. It's our rightful claim. And again, we have, if you think up to this point, we're over in about mid 1700s, up to the mid 1700s, we've already got the Pope in Spain, who's already declared in writing, who has his military force travel all the way back across the land to enslave these people. So we're about maybe 200 years along now with this actually an ideology that's happening, a conditioning of the people. So the people that are implementing this, what the Pope's orders, have some type of conditioning, that's happening on the opposite side, which is pretty scary, if you ask me. So let's move along. 1700s, 1800s. 1700s, a lot happened. This is 1700s. America becomes America. There's the Declaration of Independence. But let's go back to 1763, for example. Momentarily, the Indian Proclamation line was ignored, and the settlers moved west. So after the 7 Years' War, the British Parliament creates the Indian Proclamation line, and they ignore the line, and conflicts happen overland in Kentucky, Tennessee, Ohio, and all these western regions as their expansion continues. So we're more faced with a lot of armed European um, first. So in the beginning, it was like armed European presence, and that continued to stay. But as we transition from the mid 17th century onto the 1800s, we're talking now about a country that's being instituted. It's being created. We're talking now. Now we're getting into the nitty gritty of things, of where we're looking at treaties between certain peoples and certain regions, and for what, and underlying there's an underlying the underlying commonality we all know is the natural resources, and a third of these resources can be found on non-white lands, but the other two-thirds of the world's natural resources are found on native lands. And what's happening is that's what they want. And the native people are saying, no, we will not let you take this land. These are sacred sites. You don't just take, you cannot sell the land that does not belong to you. So it's a lot more of a separation, a disconnect that's going to begin to happen in the coming decades. Laws are made, religious persecution, residential schools. We're removing the identity of the indigenous peoples to follow the system of the oppressor. So that way, there is no more native threat. There's no more native resistance. There is no more natives to fight. So the land. So if there's nobody there, then if there's nobody there to let's say, for example, what I'm trying to say, on the Navajo reservation, I have to go and buy the land, buy my land back, let's say an acre, half acre. And if I'm not there and I don't buy it, I basically lose out. They can come in a foreign with these new in with the new tax laws that happened recently in 2017. One of the things that you'll hear about is the tax opportunity zones, and these tax opportunity zones are. Let me break it down for you. And the most traditional person. We went when we buried my mom. I was talking to one of my aunties, and she's like very. She's not the most. She doesn't have a college education. I'm not sure if she graduated high school, but she had the. She knows what these tax opportunity zones are, and she explained it to me. And she was like, "You better come. You better come and get your land, lady." But she was like a. So these tax opportunity zones, it just basically means that a foreign entity, doesn't matter from where, they can come onto these tax opportunity zones. And a lot of these are also on Native American reservations throughout the United States that will be open to foreign entities to be able to build on them, to buy it out, and then to generate revenue, to make money. So we're now back to the land grab, we're back to the money, we're back to the resources, we're back to the politics, we're back to the economics, because we're talking about tax laws. So it's all tied in. And when we talk about indigenous history, the indigenous struggle, the indigenous resistance, it's long standing. It will continue, inshallah, to stand. And it's it's not. It's not something that we take lightly, because my very existence is I wasn't supposed to survive. You know, my mom wasn't supposed to survive. My grandparents were not supposed to survive. My um, you know, it was, if you look at all these laws and everything that they've done to remove us, it's sad how they keep not succeeding. Um, Not, I don't want to say sad, but I think it's a um it's like they don't get it. It's not for them to say this is to control another human life. Like that's the worst humiliation. Like that's humiliating to, for a person to even do that, to even think that. So that's more like in the spiritual realm, because we talk about the shaitan and how he's pleased, and of how mankind is, I don't know, just that's I'm not gonna mention that. I have to keep stay on task because we're just in the 1700s. Um, so most of North America by 1763. So 1763 is one of the major events, one major historical events in what turns the tides for the future of so-called America. By 1763, most of North America is claimed and in some cases governed by European colonial powers. And we're talking about the 13 colonies over on the East Coast. Britain, France, and Spain are the main holders of this power. Armed Russian traders are still in the Aleut land in 1766. In California, here in California, 1769, Spanish missionaries removed the traditional cultural ways and they established missions. 21 missions are built along the coast, and the population shrinks from 70,000 to 15,000. And it's a devastation of the traditional life ways of hunting and gathering. So the food supply is again cut off um, for the people, creating a dependency. Slowly creating a dependency. The United States becomes independent from Britain, and the native peoples are allies of one or the other, but most of the tribes remain neutral, trusting neither the British nor the colonists. So from up until 1871, the United States enters into more than 500 treaties. So the United States government has a really bad habit. They have a really bad habit of putting things on paper and signing them and not upholding them. And we're talking about from only 1778 to 1871, not even 100 years. That's 500 treaties. Um, and it's still to this day, not one has been kept. If anything, they want to make another treaty so they can come and take more land. And that's it wouldn't be a surprise. So let's move along. Let me kind of skip a few of them. We have the Peace of Paris ignores Native people's rights. 18th century, Hawaii, the indigenous peoples of Hawaii, they come into the picture, and they fight for their here we go. Just a second, my apologies. All right. Yep, we have a lot to cover. I am going to jump right into the 1800s. The Army vaccinates the Indians in Ohio to protect the United States Army soldiers. So the U.S. Army physicians vaccinate the natives in Ohio against smallpox and other diseases. So they begin experimenting on the tribes these so-called vaccines. And then early 1800s is when also the Lewis and Clark expedition occurs. And in 1803, Congress orders medical care for the native peoples. That's great, right? So so they knew in the 1800s that medical care was going to be a need after, of course, all this biological warfare. So they acknowledge it, but Nothing ever happens. Nothing ever comes of it. Nobody pays. Um, they assign the responsibility to the U.S. War Department, but Congress does not appropriate any funding to pay for any care. And then a year later, cholera epidemic strikes Hawaii. Mass killings of bison are also mid 1800s, mid 1800s. The white settlers kill all the bison to force the U.S. Army did not enforce any treaty regulations, but they forced the tribes into um, they attempted to force the Sioux Nation into a treaty when the when gold was discovered in the Black Hills. And to this day, there's about $1.3 million setting aside. This is actually a few years ago, $1.3 billion set aside for the Sioux tribe for them to come and sign the treaty, signing over the Black Hills. And to this day, nobody has touched it. So from the day it was instituted back in before 2000, I think was the government put aside some funding, and at the time it was in the millions for the Sioux tribe regarding the Black Hills. But from that day until now, the millions have grown now to 1 billion, and there's still no one coming forward to sign. Because why? Because it was never ceded. They took that illegally, according to the treaties that were instituted back in the mid 1800s. So. Yeah, so then there's the gold rush. California gold rush, 1848. Gold is discovered in the Black Hills. 1800s, 1900s. We are a bit. I need to let you guys ask me some questions. I've got. Give me just a second. I will cover these very briefly. Historical occasions, broken treaties, current efforts that Indigenous communities are employing regarding community organizing. We have 3 so far that have been very at the forefront, and we're talking about the American Indian movement back in the when the Civil Rights movement was happening. The American Indian movement, the Indigenous Action, which is currently over in Navajo land, Diné land, Arizona, and the Indigenous Environmental Network and Honor Earth. There's a lot of organizations out there actually doing the work of protecting their environment and their resources, and also the people. So going back to the originally before 1491. So all of these organizations, these current efforts by these, the commonality, the same common goal is to be able to provide, have sovereignty. Indigenous nations have their own sovereignty. They have their own say of what to do with their resources, and to be able to institute any type of justice. Any non-natives come onto the land, and everything completely. We're talking about sovereignty. We're talking about food. We're talking about resources. We're talking about land back, getting our land back. We're talking about our artifacts, our languages. There's a lot that gets tied into this, but it all comes back down to having power. So who has the real power? The people have the power. We are the power. We have. It's a natural power. It's not something that power is not violence. Power is not brutality. Power is not repression. True power is being able to connect to the earth, to be able to put our forehead down on the ground and pray to the Creator and restore the balance. So that's true power. So all of us together, we are power. So we have to understand that and not be afraid of what the future holds of people in what they think are power when they use their abuse. So I just want to leave it at that, and I'll leave this the floor open for questions.
Thank you very much for your comments, and not your comments, your instruction that you gave us. And we'll wait for a moment to see if there are any questions that come in for those who are watching online on Facebook as well as on YouTube. But I want to for the listeners, just crystallize a few points that Sister LaTanya said. Number one, in terms of the language of reservations, and she framed it, reframed it for us, and then mentioned that this issue of reservations really starts off as prison camps for the indigenous people of this land and the original inhabitants. That's number one. Not reservations, but prison camps. And that number two, the whole issue of sovereignty for so-called reservations has always been quasi-sovereignty to this day under the Trump administration, with certain policies and so-called tax plans that have been passed that are being used to this day to still continue to land grab and take land that was that the rightful inhabitants of that land are the indigenous people of this land, the First Nations of this land. So that it's not something in the past tense. It's still going on today. The third point that I want to mention again is that the United States of America, when it comes to the indigenous people of this land, have violated or broken every single treaty that have been made with the indigenous people of this land. Every single treaty. So when we hear people in Congress from the White House, on the right or the left, questioning certain treaties with other countries, or trying to question the Iranian nuclear deal treaty, or it could be another treaty, just keep in mind that right here, these same people are signing laws and have been actively involved in breaking every single agreement that's been made with the indigenous people. And I can't say that enough. And Malcolm X touched on this issue over 55 years ago. He made reference to it, but he said that this so-called democracy is hypocrisy when it comes to the rights of not just the descendants of the enslaved Africans who were brought here, but also when it comes to the rights of the First Nation people or indigenous people. So I just had to say that, Sister LaTanya, to kind of put an exclamation point on that wonderful information. And there was more that I gleaned from that, but what you mentioned really, it just really reminded me, and I did learn a few things that was new information as well. But if you'd like to make any further comments on what I just said, Bismillah, please do. We haven't gotten any questions from the audience yet.
Okay, so I made some notes, and we're talking about why don't the Native peoples, like, why aren't they self-governing? Why aren't they self-reliant? Why aren't they getting what they deserve? Why are they getting free things? Why, all these stereotypes, free education, free healthcare, and all of that comes back into to the term what we call self-determination. So we have sovereignty, and then we have self-determination. And there's just four quick points. The reason why is, like, in the 1960s, there was legal services that were established on the reservations, and this was good for the people. But then what ends up happening is that the DC issues an order for that legal services, which is has to go through the BIA, the Bureau of Indian Affairs. So the BIA DC says legal services can no longer represent people against tribal government who are colluders with the BIA. And they can no longer handle class action lawsuits against any government. We're talking about the Russian, we're talking about, so they basically have, so that's self-determination. We get, we can do law, we can go to be lawyers, we can, but they stopped that. In the 1960s, 1978, Congress passes American Indian Religious Freedom Act. So the Muslims were able to practice their religion before the indigenous peoples were able to practice their religion. So there were six cases that went up to the Supreme Court, and all of them were lost. And so basically the reality is basically the sovereign state, the state governments are basically losing to the federal government because, again, BIA. Dual citizenship, number 3. So I basically have United States citizenship, and I have the Navajo tribal citizenship. So what this means is it basically limits my free exercise of individual and tribal sovereignty. So I don't have so it's basically continuing a loss of the lands that's attributed to the laws, the regulations. There's we're talking about remaining lands, the existing lands that are being destroyed right now. We're talking about the remaining lands that have not been touched, and then we're talking about combining those rights and being like having arbitrary monetary policies. We're talking about like, but how can we go out and get all of these things? And if one more thing, the subjugation of the American individual, American Indian individual. There are it's a force of law, but it's not repealable, if I could say that. So we have laws of government sponsored. So our tribal governments are government sponsored. Does that make sense? So anything that we do, we can still continue that force of law, and whatever that decision is, we cannot repeal it. So there's more justice for non-natives. Doesn't matter whether it's on the tribal land, whether it's local, whether it's county, whether it's state, whether it's federal. The law is always going to uphold the non-natives view when it comes to land, when it comes to water, when it comes to fishing, when it comes to all that good stuff. And and people are always afraid of of nuclear war, right? We have these nuclear talks. But are they not already raging nuclear war against us? You know, on the Navajo reservation, they waged nuclear war very well. They mined all the uranium, and then they abandoned it, and then they just basically covered it with sand. So there's like where I was born, just right outside just right off the road, there's a big old. It looks like a sewer. It looks like a big old pool, and there's two of them. And all of that is basically uranium, and they just covered it with sand. So the foreign entities, whoever came in, the mining company, they came in and they left, and they don't have any responsibility to clean it up. So we're talking about thousands. We're not talking about just one. Thousands of uranium mines for nuclear power. This illusion of power. We have the power. We are the power.
SubhanAllah. SubhanAllah. There are no more questions, and you've been very generous with your time. I will say one last closing comment for those who are watching, and this is about connecting the dots to all of these different forms of oppression, and in many cases we can see a common system of oppression that oppresses many people, and that is, many people think that the support of the occupational forces of the Palestinian land, that takes place simply because the power of a particular lobby and money. And I think if you listen to Sister LaTanya's lecture very critically and listen to the parallels, you'll see that the same philosophy of what's taking place to our brothers and sisters in Palestine and what's taking place in Gaza, you can see that this is the same philosophy that has been used for the land grabs here in the United States of America and systematic oppression against the native people of this land. Is a culture here in America and in American governance that basically is the groundwork for the neo-colonial endeavor that's taking place in Palestinian land, where those people are doing nothing but copying a playbook that was designed here. So it should be very obvious. So those of you who are interested in Palestinian rights and true Palestinian sovereignty and self-determination, who are doing this organizing here, I strongly suggest that if you live here on this land, that you connect with indigenous First Nation activists that are here in this land that we live on called the United States of America. This is my strong advice for you all. And if it wasn't very evident in her talk, go back and listen to it again. Go back and listen to it again. And with that, thank you very much. May Allah bless you. And you mentioned your mother passing, and the viewing audience doesn't know, but of course I know because we spoke. But your mom had passed away not long ago, and we ask Almighty Allah Azza wa Jal to continue to make it. Um, to make her memory as a source of inspiration for you. We ask Almighty Allah to pour and shower you with His mercy and with His sabr, and shower His sabr, His patient perseverance upon your family. We ask Almighty Allah Azza wa Jal to make you be a beacon of light and of guidance towards Islam for your people, for the Navajo Nation, for the great Navajo Nation, for the great Apache Nation, for the great indigenous people. And we ask Almighty God to give us the basira, the spiritual insight, and to grant us the himma, the determination that we will rise up and help you and help the First Nation people of this land. And and I believe that if we help the First Nation people of this land, the indigenous people of this land, that we are in fact helping ourselves. May Allah accept. Ameen, Ameen, Ameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam